Let's move into how aphids might be damaging trees and shrubs. Through their feeding, they can cause a couple of effects. Some of it may just be from the removal of fluids from the plant as they feed. In other cases, they may be causing the new growth to curl. But I also want to discuss this whole issue of honeydew and some of the things associated with that. Honeydew being the waste product that is produced by aphids and other insects as they feed on the plant. To begin with, we need to understand how aphids actually feed on a plant, because you can have aphids on a plant and not have the plant be injured. Aphids feed in a quite refined way with their mouthparts. So backing up a little bit, these are insects in the order Hemiptera. They've got what's called piercing sucking mouthparts. The mouthparts are actually nested within a little beak, a proboscis, and these enter the plant. So in this set of pictures, we see an aphid in the upper left, and that little beak area, that has got the mouthparts nested within it, the stylets that will enter into the plant. The picture on the right I really like. This is a cutaway photo. Shows the aphid at the top part with the beak, the proboscis, on the surface of the plant, but then you can see that meandering track going into the plant, and that is the track of the stylets. It's actually a thinner track than is illustrated here. Much of that is a salivary gel that is produced as the stylets enter the plant. But ultimately, aphids will be trying to access the phloem, and once they have reached the phloem, the fluids get pulled up. Actually, they move pretty much on their own and require very little pumping by the aphid if they're hitting the phloem. The stylets, although they're extremely thin, that are going into the plant are actually 4 parts. The 2 outer parts are modified mandibles that actually do the cutting and direct the stylet bundle into the phloem. In the middle of that will be the paired maxillae that will produce a food canal through which the fluids of the phloem will be moving into the body of the aphid, and there's a parallel salivary canal that they may be introducing materials as they feed, and sometimes the saliva can have adverse effects on plants. But mostly this is a quite refined feeding. They are directing the mouthparts in a way that causes very little cell death, so that once they reach their ultimate feeding site, they can stay in place for the rest of their life. They haven't destroyed the site. They keep it intact. And that's why you can have high numbers of aphids for some time and not be injured. The plants will not be injured. They can recover from it. However, were you to have high levels for a long time, that's where we get into issues. Once they're removing so much fluid, you might see wilting of the plants, leaf yellowing, retarded growth, potentially even death, but that would not be something you would ever expect to see outdoors, because sustained outdoor populations of aphids rarely last long. Might be a couple of weeks, but then the cavalry arrives, then the lady beetles come on, and the flower flies come on, and the lacewings come on, and the parasitoid wasps come in, and they'll usually crush it, so that the infestation is of fairly short duration. Not long enough to cause any significant damage to the plant. And again, cell damage has not occurred. We're just talking about fluid removal from the phloem. This honeydew issue, though, is sometimes a problem on outdoor plants. And again, honeydew is this waste material that aphids and some other insects will produce if they feed on the phloem. And illustrated in this picture is the underside of a leaf. Got lots of aphids on it. The fluid is the honeydew. It is this sticky fluid that is the waste material that when you're pulling in a lot of sugar and water from the phloem, most of it is subsequently expelled as honeydew. Little sticky drops that shimmer, and this is a really good diagnostic. I mean, you can often catch the glint of light off a leaf that has a little bit of shininess to it, and that will tell you to look a little closer. There's some sort of honeydew producer on that plant. So honeydew is, again, the waste material It is not plant sap. It had been plant sap not too long ago, but it was last seen out the back end of an aphid or some other honeydew producer. And it is very useful for diagnostics. You see the shimmering, and that should attract your eye to look a little closer. So in this picture here, I'm showing you a pepper leaf in my greenhouse. Wasn't paying attention that year, and what brought my attention was I saw a little bit of sparkles on the pepper leaf. Looking a little closer, I could also see these little white objects, and these white objects, of course, are skins of aphids that have been discarded. Look to the leaf above. There will be the aphids. They're excreting honeydew that's dropping underneath them, and they're periodically molting, and the cast skins drop to the plant below them. And again, aphids are not the only things that produce honeydew. Uh, Other insects that feed on the phloem that are in the order Hemiptera will also do this. Around here, 99% of all the honeydew you're going to see on a tree or shrub comes out of an aphid or a soft scale. But elsewhere, it might be another kind of insect. If you move a little further to south, mealybugs and whiteflies become much more common on outdoor plants than they would occur in the northern half of the U.S. And indoor plants can have issues with soft scales. Outdoors, you might see an occasional psyllid, some leafhoppers. These are all other insects that can cause honeydew incidental to their feeding. And another issue in landscape settings that can be a problem is sooty molds. Sooty molds are a kind of mold that grows on honeydew. So you have a honeydew contaminated surface, such as the photograph in the lower right, kind of shiny. You see that? These molds will then grow on that. These are not pathogenic molds. These are molds that just grow on honeydew. They're not growing into the plant. They're growing on the surface of the plant. And sometimes this is an issue, and it is also an indication that you have a lot of a honeydew producer on the plant if you see it on the leaves. So in this case, we're seeing quite a bit of shininess on the leaf and then some mold growing on the leaves, in this case being produced by linden aphid, which is a common insect I see right in my own backyard. Elsewhere, an aphid that would be commonly associated with a woody plant that shows honeydew and associated sooty mold might be crepe myrtle aphid, where that plant is grown. So in the picture on the right, it shows a crepe myrtle bush, and much of the interior leaves are quite grayish, and that's sooty mold. There had been an infestation of aphids on that earlier, dropping honeydew on the leaves. They became gray. Newer growth looks fine, so there's no honeydew, no sooty mold on that. But it could be on any surface of the plant. It's not just on the leaves. It depends on where the honeydew drips. So often you'll see it on the bark of trees. So in this case, it happens to be American elm, which is right outside my building. And every American elm in my state has branches that are abnormally dark on the upper surface. The root flares might be a little bit dark. And that's not bark, that's mold growing on the bark, because this is a plant that has a chronic situation with a couple of honeydew producers, a soft scale and an aphid. And you walk around, particularly in time of year when the leaves are fallen from trees and shrubs, and you'll notice that some trees, some shrubs have black bark, abnormally black bark on them, and that can tip you off that is a plant that has a history of some honeydew producer. An aphid around here, maybe a whitefly if you live down in southern Florida. But the black bark, abnormally black bark, produced by sooty mold, that is a good diagnostic for you to be watching for. And it doesn't need to be even on the plant. So this is next door to my house. They've got a little grove of aspen, and aphids are chronic on this plant. The honeydew drips on the bark, and the bark gets some sooty mold on it, but more importantly, it drips onto the sidewalk. And so to the drip line, there is a gray ring around this tree. And you can walk around and sometimes see on sidewalks and the like sooty mold on the sidewalk, and that's an unattractive situation. I mean, this I like this example here. This is on campus, and it happens to be right outside the landscape design building. And very shortly after this building was put up and the landscaping put up with it, the sidewalk underneath that tree there started to turn black. That's sooty mold, and that's because they spec'd a tree, in this case a linden, which was probably the best tree you could have picked to create this situation, because it's very consistent to have serious problems with aphids on it here. So the landscape designer could have chosen probably almost any other tree in that site, and you would not see the sidewalk turning black like that. Again, the type of honeydew producers that you're going to have are going to vary wherever you live, but this is a good local example for me to show you. And then there's other issues with honeydew being produced. One is that ants will be attracted to this. Many ants are sweet lovers, and the most common natural source of sweet material available to ants is usually honeydew. And ants will collect this material and then return it as an important part of their food. And this is a mutualistic relationship. There's benefits to both players, both the ants and the aphids. Now, this waste material of the aphid, this honeydew, is actively collected by ants. So I think we can see this a little bit. So you can see these little droplets just fed on one there. Let's see if it's going to feed on some more here. So periodically the aphids will give up the excess honeydew. The ants will collect it. When they've got their crop full, they'll return back to the colony and store it within the colony. And in return, these ants are going to provide protection. Again, aphids are almost entirely defenseless. And so were some kind of insect to move on to this plant to consume the aphids, usually they'll be well defended by an ant to drive off a lady beetle, to drive off a lacewing larva, or some of the other predators. So sometimes we have problems with these honeydew producers lasting longer than they would because ants are interfering with these natural enemies. Now, that being said, I do want to bring this little side note here. There are plants that produce honeydew-like material that do not have insects involved in it, and the one that comes up all the time around here is peonies. If you ever grow peonies, then the buds of peonies will often have ants crawling all over them in spring. And this is because peonies are a kind of flower that produces a honeydew-like material outside of the flower itself. The buds of peonies will produce this. So were you to exclude ants, maybe put a little sticky barrier or a little bit of Vaseline or something along the underside of that bud, you would see what is oozing from the plant. And that's what they're collecting. And there's other kinds of plants that produce what we call extrafloral nectar and sites, presumably to attract insects such as ants that may then provide benefit to the plant by feeding on pests. And honeydew will be collected by other things. It will be collected by bees. It'll also be collected by nuisance wasps. And a very common serious problem wasp around here is the western yellowjacket, by far the most common stinging insect in this part of the world. And sometimes people will see large numbers of yellow jackets surrounding some plant, and they want to deal with the yellow jackets. I don't like these stinging insects all over my shrub. Well, the way to manage this is to deal with the honeydew producer. Once they're no longer producing honeydew, the plant will no longer be attractive to these kinds of insects. And then the final kind of thing that can be important in damage to plants is leaf curling. Some aphids can curl the leaves of some plants. Now, not every aphid curls leaves. Not every aphid curls leaves on all plants, even if they curl it on some. But some aphid plant combinations do result in leaf curls. And this can only happen when the leaves are first coming out. They're just coming out. The aphid is removing fluid at this time, perhaps introducing saliva that has some effects on the growth of the plant, but the leaf doesn't fully extend, and it grows into some sort of distorted leaf curl. So there can be a range in how curled these leaves might be. My best leaf curls that I will see around here would be on some of the plums, and these can be intensely curled, so the leaves are almost non-recognizable. Uh, Others are more subtle, so hawthorn or chokecherry or tart cherry, fairly modest of leaf curling. Peach, with the green peach aphid, that gets really curled up quite intensely. And then sometimes it'll be even more involved. So there's a situation that developed when the honeysuckle witch's broom aphid got into North America back in the uh, early 1980s. And in some places in the country, honeysuckle is a desirable plant, including around here. Well, this aphid came in, and it is a serious leaf curler. It not only causes the new leaves to curl, but it also induces side shoots to form in reaction to that injury. They then get infested, and you get this big, what we call a witch's broom kind of growth. And because of this aphid, this plant is almost no longer grown anywhere in the state. It's become a more difficult plant to grow since this insect came in. And one final picture showing you a leaf curl. So lots of viburnum. The only one I've ever seen a leaf curler on is the snowball viburnum. And what we see kind of moving from the right in this image here is you see some curled leaves. Those were infested with aphids when the leaves were quite small. A little further down, some more curled leaves. Again, aphids were present on those leaves when they were curling, when they were coming out, so they got curled. Some more curled leaves. But then towards the end, you start to see just a little bit of curl. So maybe there are just a few aphids when those leaves were coming out, and then subsequent to that, the leaves look fine. And whether those aphids disappeared because of predators or they flew to their summer host, I can't tell you in this situation, but it does have a summer host, so that's probably what happened. We never see this leaf curling after spring on this plant around here. Now, these are not the only kinds of insects that can cause a curling of the new growth of a tree or shrub. However, I would say that aphids are the default diagnosis. When you see this, that's what I would first suspect. It could be injury by insects like plant bugs that might cause little damaged areas in leaves that then result in a kind of curl, or a bit of freeze injury that can damage a bit of the leaf so it grows in a curled way, or some fungal infections such as powdery mildews can cause some leaf curling. But first thing to expect is if you see a leaf curl, an aphid did that when that leaf was quite young.